I am Dr. Alicia with Coaching with Dr. Alicia, and today I'm really excited. I'm going to introduce you to my favorite colleague, Dr. Dr. Ogbuagu. He is a fellow social work professor at my home institution, and he is here today to talk about his life, to talk about everything he has to offer to potential clients. He is a social worker and a therapist, and he is helping people with similar backgrounds as himself, as well as anybody in the community. And we all know that there's a shortage of Black men who are open to take clients, and here we have one of them. He has a doctoral degree from from Canada, Montreal.
Yeah,
McGill in Montreal, a BSW, MSW, and PhD. He is a full professor of social work like myself. We went through the rings together, and today I just want you to get to know my fellow buddy, Dr. Ogbuagu. And if you notice the last name, Ogbuagu, he is from Nigeria, and he comes to us from Nigeria. He moved to Canada, and then he's here in Illinois, and he's my neighbor next door. His office is right next to mine at my home institution. And how about Dr. Ogbuagu, just let everybody know who you are and anything else you want to add.
Thank you, Dr. Alicia, for the profoundly kind introduction of myself. My name is Dr. Ogbuagu, and the name is spelled Ogbuagu, which means killer of lion. Because in African homesteads, my great grandfather used to own livestock, and the lions would come feed off them. So one day he strangled one of the lions, and then the family's name, transitioned from what it was to killer of lion. So Ogbuagu means killer of lion. African names are very highly poignant, and that includes mine. But I also happen to bear English names because of British colonialism. I went to school under the British system in Nigeria, elementary, high school, we call them secondary school. Previously, we called them college. And then, of course, I attended the University of Nigeria, where I had a Bachelor of Science in Sociology and Anthropology. So my story, it's long, but I'm not going to bore you with the details. Succinctly put, I am one who's made multi-transitions. We call ourselves transnationals because we have moved and have different countries that, we call our own. Currently, I'm in Illinois, and I'm an Illinoisan and an American, just like every one of you. So, of course, I have siblings scattered all over the world, including Sydney, Australia, Frankfurt, Germany, and all over the place. And my dad and mom had 13 kids, 9 of whom are surviving. But we all went to college. So I don't know if I have answered the question, but that's where I came from. And now I'm here in Illinois. I'm enjoying every bit of it.
I'll tell you, recently I did the 23andMe, it's the DNA, and I'm like eager. I got my results back, and I look on there, and I'm 18% Nigerian. So I got Nigerian blood in me, apparently. So we're attached at the hip, Dr. Buster.
Yeah, you remember a few years ago I named you Ngozi, which means gift, God's gift.
Yes.
Yeah, and how was I to know that, the DNA certification will also hone you towards where I come from?
Yeah, and it's really interesting because we were talking about all of these multiple migrations and the fact that it's riddled with the trauma, because we all know that Nigeria went through a civil war, and for many, many years I've heard you reference being part of a civil war, being a child soldier, and living in these terrible conditions. And I can't help but to think, wow, that's so much like what's happening in Gary, Indiana, where I grew up. What's happening in the south side of Chicago and west side of Chicago, and a lot of the areas that are near and dear to my heart. Our histories are so similar because it's riddled with this trauma of violence. And I'm just curious, did you have anything to add to that about how you were uprooted and moved to these places and the migrations and how you integrated into all of these different environments? Not only are you integrated, but you killed it. Talking about the killer of lion, Dr. Ogbuagu, y'all don't know. He is the killer of anything that comes against him. He's a survivor. He is brilliant. And I don't know, like, Nigerians are just one of the smartest people in the world. So just talk about this transition and all the trauma from your past. And of course, I can talk about it from Gary and Chicago, and we all know. But what happened from your end of the world?
Thank you. In 1904, when the British assumed the territories of Nigeria, they amalgamated disparate groups that had nothing in common. These were kingdoms and countries all by themselves, but for the British convenience, they amalgamated different groups. Generally speaking, in my part of Nigeria, which is Igbo, we were animists. And of course, the North and the rest of them, of course, they amalgamated them with the rivalry that came. So what happened in Rwanda was what the British did in Nigeria. When they came, they found that the Igbos, of which I am one, could not be controlled because they don't have a centralized government. They have what we refer to as democracy, where different families sent representatives, whereas in the North, one person had the power of life and death, and that was the emir. So essentially speaking, of course, they suborned the war based upon killings, religious. And of course, at that time in 1966, over 40,000 Igbos were slaughtered, mostly in the North. Headless torsos, in runaway trains and all that. So when it became apparent that if those of us in the South didn't do anything, we would be wiped out. We had to go to the war. And I was just a kid. I was just a little kid, and we went in the no food, no shoes. Most of our shoes were cut from car tires, and we tied them with all kinds of vines. And of course, that war took about 2 million lives, especially from my side of it. And it was because of hunger and starvation and malnutrition. And then, of course, after the war ended, we came back to the classrooms that were non-existent. There was no building, there were no books. We sat under cinder blocks to study in the outside. Some people had post-traumatic stress disorder, but we had no word for it. Mm-hmm. As a matter of fact, the world had no word for it. Some of them were zoned out, talking gibberish. Some of them killed themselves. Some of them consumed alcohol and drugs until they died. I guess we were the lucky ones, as Cindy Lauper would say. Mom, we're not the lucky ones. I guess we were the lucky ones because with resiliency that we built. From that, we went back to school. I finished high school with my cohorts, and then I went to the university in Nigeria and studied in sociology and anthropology, and graduated, and then began working. First as a broadcaster at the Federal Radio Corporation of Nigeria. And of course, sometimes the contents of my program was not amenable. The British, the colonial, because after the war, the military was in charge. And of course, when they told you to jump, all you needed to do was ask, sir, how high? The contents of my program, they did not like, because I told them that we believed in the principles of democracy. I was the financial secretary of the Conference of Alumni Associations, and the University of Nigeria in the Syria I was at. So the contents of my programs, I them to the extent that I left as a refugee with my then 7-year-old daughter, who is a medical doctor now in Canton, Ohio. And of course, I was a single mom because I had her only, and the rest of the family was running helter-skelter all over. So essentially speaking, we came to Canada in Montreal. Nobody will hire me with all the degrees I had. The university I attended, University of Nigeria, had its first presidents from East Lansing, Michigan, the one you hear today where killings have occurred. 5 of them were the presidents. So we did everything that it was the same credit load system. But when I came to Canada, they said I needed to have a Canadian experience. I have nothing. So I started cleaning toilets so I could feed my kids and the rest of them. And of course, I decided I was going to go back to school. But remember, to work, I had an accent, and I don't know who doesn't have an accent. And, I had to learn what they call the Canadian experience, whatever that was. So Dr. Dr. Alicia, that was the gauntlet I had to run. But I was fixated on going back to school because I knew I was going to lose the best of me. I asked myself, what was I going to do when I turned 50? What was I going to do when I was no longer able to do manual labor? So, in between that, my family joined me from Nigeria, and the first thing I did was went back to school at McGill in Montreal. And I said, what was I going to do? I needed to do something that will help other people like me. The first interview I went was a refugee woman from the Middle East, whom the immigration officer refused to grant refugee status because she didn't look at them in the face. But culturally, we don't look at superiors in the face because it was a sign of disrespect. So that was the first thing I did. And then that was the eureka moment. I said to myself, I think I need to go into the helping professions. And that's how I went to McGill to study social work. And of course, I was one of the older ones in my class. And because I went to work at 6 p.m. and returned at 7 a.m. and then went to class at 9 a.m., I promptly fell asleep in class. And my classmates of 75 were making a fun of me. So until something pertinent occurred, I would raise my hand and I had something to say. And after a while, they began to listen to what I had to say, which they felt wasn't just rubbish. So but what happened was that they wouldn't even do group work with me in social work and a few other Black people in the place. So we tried done, but in that class of 75, I took all the other people who agreed with me to do the master's. But of the 75, I was the only one that did a PhD. And then I began to teach at McGill for a little while. So having surmounted all that, I also was employed by the Children's State Society of Ottawa as a frontline social worker where I saw a lot of trauma. Remember that was the period when Bosnian refugees were coming into Canada, and there were 5,000 of them. So I had more people suffering multiple layers of trauma, which also mirrored my lived experience as somebody who experienced horrible civil war and experienced forced migration, to Canada. So I intervened with many of them. And then, of course, refugees were also coming into Montreal from Haiti, from all parts, from Somalia.
Yes.
At that time. So most of the files belonging to ethnic minorities were handed to me, and that was how I honed in on my therapeutic interventions with clients across the board.
Gee.
So, yes.
Yeah, I mean, what you're saying is really fascinating. It's like you went through all of these multiple migrations and had to integrate yourself in all of these different all of these different environments, and you made it. You succeeded. It wasn't like you actually did it. Like, you made your mark. I don't know if people realize this, but it wasn't like Dr. Buster just did this and kind of squeaked by. Like, he excelled, and you really overcame a lot of these things. And how did you overcome? Like, what did you draw upon so that you can succeed in all of these different areas? I feel like you're like the biggest survivor. You need like a big gold star for being like the biggest survivor of so much. I mean, me and you, we've been through a lot already, just being two Black faculty members. We've been through enough, and we're continuing to go through quite a bit, you know? So, so how do you overcome all of these different challenges that gets you where you are today, and to be able to contribute that with your clients?
Yeah, one of my biggest mantra is to plan my work and work my plan.
Okay.
Because if you plan your work and you don't work your plan, you didn't do anything. Remember that energy is the ability to do work. So if you stand in a place and you don't do anything, you're tired, but you haven't worked. So I also fear of the future, because I have lost several years. I lost 3 years of schooling because of the Civil War. And then I came to Canada with nothing, 2 duffel bags. The bigger one was my daughter's. I had also lost because there were many years in between that I was fighting for my family to join me. There were many years in between that I didn't know where I was going to. And I had a kid who was then 7, and a woman and a girl who I had to take care of in every way, shape, or form. I also had to face Canadian racism, which is insidious. In the United States, the racism is in your face. You know where you stand. In Canada, it's not in your face. You wouldn't even know that you are a recipient of multiple subjectivities until it bites you in the behind. So I just said to myself, well, if I didn't get better, I can't make other people get better. So I first had to work on myself. And how did I do that? I trusted in what my ability, because every individual has significant ability, or God won't have them here on the planet. Every single person has something that they can achieve. And I said to myself, one, I had to get an education, and I have to complete, and I have to perform better than anybody else. And I stuck to my goals. So that was planning my work and working my plan. And then, of course, I also trusted people. Yeah. Especially learn from the people who were going through some of the things I was going through, because there were many refugees whose files I worked on. So they were able to relate to my lived experience, including the multiple layers of trauma, with headless torsos, with women's breasts cut out, with unborn babies cut open and then thrown out, and all that we saw before the onset and during the Civil War. So I had to tell myself that I would be useless to people if I don't fix myself first. And that was where my resiliency started. I knew that I was an immigrant coming from somewhere, but I had to find a route somewhere to plant myself, and that's how, and then there were several good people along the way who saw what I was doing when I was doing my doctoral program. Because mine was a double major, a double PhD in social work and integrated studies in education. And I had 4 advisors. So at some point, the advisors didn't come with their own agenda. They knew my trauma, but they came listening to what I had to say. And each time I spoke, they found that I had meaning in what I said. So that encouraged me and lifted me to the extent that I was able to perform and become who I am now.
Gee, I mean, as you're talking, I'm thinking about my own migrations and, migrating from Alabama, which is the blackest place. Tuskegee, Alabama is the blackest place in the world, to Gary, Indiana, which is another blackest place in the world, and then going to a big white university And it was my first time being in a classroom with white people. It was really different for me, but I had what got me through was I had such a nurturing environment. I was protected from a lot of things, although there were many people in Tuskegee and in Gary, Indiana that weren't protected, but I was sheltered from a lot of things. And I think that's what saved me. And then I was given the confidence, to know that I can work on it. And when you're talking about know the plan and work that plan, I worked that plan to graduate and overcome stuff. So I'm really connecting and vibing with what you're saying. And it's like, we're just highly determined individuals. We're not unusual.
And the irony of it all was that all the 4 advisors in my doctoral program were white people.
Yes.
Professor Ann Beer, Professor Kevin McDonough, Professor Leonard, Peter Leonard, bless his memories, and Shari Brotman, and they all were rooting for me. Mm-hmm. So I didn't do it all by myself. I did it by the dint of human engineering, those who believed in resiliency. Because my one of the things I usually say is, don't tell me I'm resilient. Remove all those obstacles to make me less resilient. All those obstacles that make me vulnerable. If you remove them, I don't have to fight to be resilient. So my idea behind intervening with people is to try and see how we can dismantle, first interrogate, then dismantle all those obstacles that make them vulnerable. Then resiliency will be built all on its own.
Yeah.
Because if the obstacles, the barriers are there, and you're building resilience, it cancels out. You're not going anywhere. It's like trying to go to Louisiana and you're heading towards 55 North. You're not getting there. So resilience is built when the obstacles are being chipped away. Those barriers that encapsulate you, cocoon you into oblivion.
You're so right, and it's interesting. You talked about the trust thing. Like it really. I mean, you had to trust other people to help you. You got the hero's journey, Dr. Buster. You are the hero's journey because in that journey, there's helpers along the way that's going to help you. And they'll be right on time. They show up right on time, I mean, just think about
because
our journey.
University, there were no black people.
Yes.
I didn't have any black role model I was going to look up to. So, and of course, the faculty found me as somebody who was uppity. Uppity, and uppity black, which I'm really proud to wear as my badge of honor. But those who believed in me in that department, in that school, gave me all the instruments. And then I decided that it was time not only to plan the work, but to walk the plan.
Yeah. I get it. And this was nice getting to know you, Buster, on this level. It's really kind of cool talking to you. I got one last question before we end. And that's, what is your favorite book?
I read a lot of books, including controversial ones.
Okay.
I read I love to read bell hooks.
Yes.
Mountains and Men. I also the bell curve.
Woo. Okay.
Yeah. I actually have a copy here on my shelf. So essentially speaking, I am somebody who reads anything that is before me. Mm-hmm. Yeah, regardless of what it is. As a matter of fact, I have also read critical race theory, and it's not the interpretation that people give to it.
Right.
Essentially speaking, those who say that it's about hating whiteness and all it represents means that they haven't read the book. What the book says, it's for us to know who we are, where we came from, so we know where we are going to.
Well, you know, right now, as we speak, as the date of this recording, there's chaos going on in Tallahassee, Florida, which is where I got my doctorate, because they're removing Black history from the curriculum right as we speak, and people are out protesting, and teachers are threatening to quit, and all of these things. This is happening right now. So I'm going to turn my TV on and, you know, pay attention to this. But it's so apropos that you bring this up in this moment.
Yeah, and Dr. Alicia, let me tell you something. No Black people sees white people as evil. For instance, if it went for white people, the civil rights movement would not have been successful. It was only when they joined, using the concept of critical race theory, which they hadn't read. It was in their thought process. It was philosophical to them. They said, no, this is not right. Therefore, we need to join the movement. So those who think that Black people hate white people or that critical race theory foments the hatred have not read the book.
That's right.
It's only when white people, remember that a lot of white people were killed because of the civil rights movement. It was only when they joined. And then, of course, Kennedy was not interested initially, until he had this context with Richard Nixon, who accepted Martin Luther King. It was then that he pushed this event.
Yeah.
So essentially speaking, critical race theory and those books are not designed for white to hate Black or vice versa.
That's right. Yeah, and they need to read it. I think they need to read it more than we do because we live it, you know. I think this is great. I read a lot of books. Okay.
Yeah, essentially speaking, from Canada, because in 2008, another layer of migration happened because I left Canada to begin teaching with Dr. Alicia in the same university where we are now. So I have been here in Illinois as a resident and a citizen for 15 years.
Wow.
With Dr. Alicia. And of course, the classes are, the faculty body has, to all intents and purposes, where I teach, I don't see a lot of, I probably am the only Black full-time male professor.
I think I'm the only Black female full professor.
Yeah.
I don't know of any others. I mean, there could be. I don't know of any others.
In the place.
Yeah.
But the good thing about it is that I also have classes where Black, white, blue, green are first generation, multi-trauma families.
Yes.
So when I share my story, I teach required courses. One of them is policy. If you do a survey of students who take this course, 99.99% of them don't want to take the course until they meet me.
Yeah.
So when they meet me, I get to know them. By the time, if the class is 10, 1, 2, 3, 10, 20, by the time classes begin, I have memorized their names. Because I remember that the students are not numbers, and that some of them have multi-intersectionalities of operation that they've gone through that may make mine pale in significance. So I have that in my mind when I attend to them, and when I share my brief story with them, they're able to conceptualize that I'm actually there. Some of them actually became professors as I speak with you today.
I agree with you. It's like teaching. It's like you're so a little bit out of touch, but teaching, because I teach the cross-cultural practice class, teaching that class is it's refreshing because people are all on the same board. And I was talking to Dr. Boyce about it. I'm like, you got these white suburban moms, you know, that come into the classroom and they are furious about what happened to Bill Cosby, and they're furious about all this stuff. And it's really interesting how they kind of they're more furious than we are. They get kind of all riled up. So, we're definitely, I feel privileged to be in this situation, the good, the bad, and the ugly of it. It's pretty cool.
And most of my most powerful students are actually white.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
They're actually white because they are exposed to how the order lives. Mm-hmm. And it was for this purpose, Dr. Alicia, that I and 3 professors in 2008, one is from Penn State University, the other one is from the University of Manitoba in Winnipeg, and me founded an international conference.
Yes.
In 2008, which is still going on. Actually, Dr. Alicia had already published under that criteria. And this international conference attracts people from as far back as China,
yes,
Australia. And what are they talking about? They are talking about multi-layers of trauma. A few came from Nepal, and they are talking about how China is oppressing them. So they come to this conference to debrief. So my journey in Illinois is to help people who have experienced even more trauma than I to debrief and understand that they are not alone, and that, according to my senior brother, every problem has an expiration date.
Yes.
But you need to identify that date.
I think we'll end with that. Every problem you have has an expiration date. I love it.
Then you have to identify it.
Identify the date. Yes.
Yeah.
That is so great. Thank you so much for talking to me. I really appreciate it. It's a treat because I don't get to see you as often as I want to. But this has been really cool. Thank you, Dr. Buster.
Thank you, Dr. Alicia. It was a privilege to speak with you.
All righty. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.